It's time to get personal. 2 years ago, my friend just suddenly disappeared. Any attempt to get him to hang out was promptly met with a serious no. I only recently discovered that he was undergoing an issue which put him in a total state of solitude. While this was hard for my friend, I really wanted to know and understand what I could have done to help him to know exactly what is solitude. And so, my research began. I couldn't believe it. The sheer volume of content was absolutely overwhelming. While initially people might think solitude could generally be a negative thing, the reality is that it goes way beyond good or bad. How is it that solitude can be responsible for depression and anxiety, but also necessary to allow healing to occur? If Canadians have never been so alone, why is Canada consistently rated one of the happiest places on Earth? How is it that being isolated can cause irreversible trauma, yet at the same time have whole religions based on that solitude? If solitude can cause this much damage, why do people spend hours and hours alone when creating art? In order to get answers, I decided to reach out to Queen's University's talented up-and-coming artist, Amber.
My name is Amber Rose Viola Caroline Mavis Burns Laverne, and I'm a Bachelor of Fine Arts student at Queen's University. I'm in my 4th year also. Solitude for an artist is important because it gives you time to reflect on yourself. Not only on yourself, but also on the work that you make and the ideas that you have. It helps you come up with more things to work on. An artist's process involves loneliness quite a bit, I would say. A lot of time is spent just coming up with new ideas by yourself or reflecting on the ideas that you do have. And although you can gain inspiration from other people, I usually find that the best inspiration comes from time spent alone, viewing things by myself. When I've completed a work, I am usually a little bit embarrassed about it. I don't want to show anyone, but at the same time, I don't feel like I'm finished with it, and I try to use what I have to gather more inspiration for something else. When I'm working, I just kind of zone out. I lose track of time and I forget all bodily functions. I don't remember to eat. I just kind of get in the zone and can be like that for hours at a time. It's very relaxing. I would say solitude is a good thing. It gives you time to reflect on yourself, and I would say that the best time I spend is when I spend it alone. I like to think about who I am as a person, and I would say that helps me become a better person and a better artist. Art can definitely be either a collaboration or it can be individual. For me personally, I would say it's individual. I don't really care about other people's opinions on my art. I don't really care what other people want me to paint. For me, art is just something I do for myself. I paint something that I find pretty, and that's about it.
While Amber provided much needed insight, I felt it only scratched the surface. I needed to dig deeper. There must be some science behind the reasoning of isolation. I decided to travel all the way to London, Ontario, and speak with top neuropsychologist Susan Pigott and psychologist Tamara Biederman to find out the science behind this mystery.
So my name is Susan Pigott, and I'm a neuropsychologist, and I Well, I've been working as a neuropsychologist for almost 30 years. Well, nobody else wants to sit down and read all that stuff. I mean, I think solitude is something we all need at times. So for me, talking about myself, I spend a lot of time alone thinking about things when I'm putting my reports together. But I also see my patients and my clients as needing solitude to process what's happened to them. Now, sometimes solitude, I think, can be a bad thing. Sometimes people cut themselves off from everybody else. They don't want to see their friends anymore, and they're just devastated and they become quite depressed. I think you need to find the right balance between trying to help a person, but giving them the space they need to process. And this is not really neuropsychology, but there's literature on, children raised in orphanages who are adopted here in Canada later. And actually, I have a few of those children in my practice because they ended up, unfortunately, having brain injuries. There's always the question with these children, like, what is the impact in terms of their cognitive functioning of just basically sitting in a room? Like, they basically sit them in chairs all day in some of these orphanages. And I'm not criticizing these orphanages because I'm sure that, we have a much higher standard of living. But there's all kinds of literature on the effects of this, basically being isolated in a time period of your life where you should be having a lot of interaction, learning language skills. And these children have issues in terms of attachment when they get older, even when they're adopted into good families. The older children have lots of problems bonding and have an attachment disorder. And there's also concerns on how that might affect cognitive functioning. It's interesting because as we get older, dementia becomes much more common diagnosis. And, so people are really working on trying to figure out ways to keep our brains healthy. And they find one of the big predictors as to whether you'll develop dementia is isolation, social isolation. So people who have large social networks as they get older, stay involved, meet people for coffee, etc., and are involved in higher level cognitive tasks, do a lot better. They're less likely to show cognitive aging or dementia. So that would suggest that isolation is bad for you if you're trying to keep your brain as spry as possible. People have different levels of solitude they're comfortable with. We have introverts versus extroverts in our society, and I don't think you can really change people. So I think if you've got to, you have a certain personality type, especially by the time you're an adult. So if you've got somebody who's introverted, they're going to need solitude. What might be the best amount of stimulation for them is very different than what you might think of for yourself. So I think you've always got to be sensitive to that. Just within my family, I'm fairly extroverted, but some members of my family are quite introverted. And I'll be like, to my 18-year-old daughter, you're staying home again? And she's like, Mom, when you go out and you're around people, it gives you energy. I see you get all excited. She said, with me, it just drains me. So I can handle maybe 20 minutes, and then I don't want to be there anymore. And, this is interesting to me, like living with more introverted people, because I've come to realize you just have to go with the flow. That's my own theory. I was actually an incredibly introverted child. I didn't generally speak at all. I could, but I didn't. And then we moved to Canada from England when I was 11 years old. And then I found Canadians even more extroverted. And I'm thinking, I really had better pretend that I'm extroverted or I'm not going to survive in this society. So I did, and I think I kind of went overboard. But I was like so introverted as a child. My teachers used to go to my parents, you better keep an eye on this because she's really far too quiet. Now, to my credit, I think what I liked to do as a child was, believe it or not, spend all kinds of time thinking about how memory worked and cognition, and I'd already decided by the age of 8 to be a psychologist and study memory.
Going to be a psychologist.
And, so I didn't find my peers were that interested in discussing that with me. So I think, even though I'm an extrovert socially, I spend a lot of time alone, like as I'm writing my reports and thinking about things. And that's, I changed, I think, in terms of how I interacted with other people and became very extroverted. But there's still a part of me that's an introvert. But, we've just done the Christmas party scene, and I think I'll be introverted for a while now.
My name's Dr. Tamara Biederman. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work here in London, Ontario. I work a lot with people who have chronic illness, physical illness, and they're adjusting to their limitations, and also with people who have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. Social connection is incredibly important to maintaining one's mental health. The way we define it is different, but we are social beings by nature. Evolutionarily, we're drawn that way. We depend on one another. Physiologically, we release oxytocin when we touch. So there's a drive and a need, psychological and physiological, for us to interact with other people. That being said, again, everybody's set point is a little bit different. So there are some people who have a strong drive, and they need a lot of connection to maintain their mental or emotional health. And other people have a lower drive, and they can maintain a very reasonable sense of mental health without a lot of social interaction. Those people tend to have more of a spiritual interaction. So they believe they're having an interaction, or they experience an interaction even when they're alone. The problems that occur, again, depending, when people are isolated, depending on their social needs. So if their social needs are very highly violated, so there are people who are social by nature, and their sense of being is really anchored to their relationship with other people. So they would experience a strong sense of depression, most likely would be the first thing that we would see. In extreme cases, we'd see sort of a detachment from reality. So psychotic episodes, sometimes splitting of personalities, creating new realities, because they can't exist in a healthy way without that touchstone, without that interaction or relationship. But I think solitude is changing as the technology is changing. Not only is it changing because we're communicating more virtually than we used to, so that is reducing the face-to-face interaction, which is actually where the depth of our communication comes from. But technology in general keeps us so busy, cognitively busy. There's also it's always something stimulating. There's more information coming in, whether it's through people's Facebook feeds or the CNN banners. We're being much more bombarded by stimulation than we had been like 2, 3, 4 decades ago. And we're actually finding that children who are growing up in this era are sort of starting at a deficit as far as social skills, and that's why we're seeing escalating rates of depression and teen suicide. One of the hypotheses that is gaining a lot of traction is that it is this lack of social foundation base, and because we are social animals, that it's not just a need, it's a drive to connect with individuals. We're unfortunately starting people off at a deficit, and we're not creating a world where there's a lot of places for them to make up that deficit. For me, and what I share with a lot of my patients, is one of the ways to do that is to spend more time without technology. So go into nature. Nature is the best place where you can find nothing but positive. It's bigger than you, it's permanent, it has some truths in it that sometimes we get far away from because we are so bombarded with stimulation on a regular basis. Point that it's not just the amount of stimulation that is more prevalent with technology. I agree that a lot of the stimulation we're coming is negative because there is that arm's length communication. People are feeling more free with that anonymity or relative anonymity to say things that they would normally say. The sensationalization, if we just watch the news today, there's a drive to more negative information, even though I choose to believe there are positive things going on to the world. Today, we don't see that. So there is also, in addition to the prevalence, there's definitely a valence switch, much more negativity around us. And again, not a lot of substantial backing on how to how to protect yourself from that, how to process it in a way that it doesn't have to sit on you as heavily and that you don't have to take that on as your truth. Sometimes it's depression that drives that cost. People who have depression have low energy, low motivation, so it costs them a lot just to get the initiative to initiate a social or sustain a social interaction. So it costs them more, and they make efforts to preserve that so they can have a more pleasant experience by themselves. So depending on their coping resources, you would see some different degrees of detachment from connection and reality. Right. The most extreme being psychosis, that they're completely detached from reality because their touchstone has been removed. I do believe it's healthy to be alone. It's the degree or the amount of time you spend alone that differs per person. So everybody has sort of their set point that is the healthiest for them, the amount of time to be alone, based on their personality, based on their experiences, based on their emotional makeup. But most people require at least some degree of alone time to decompress, to destimulate, even to process and evaluate their social interactions throughout the day. You might have someone who doesn't get downtime or alone time, and they continue to function, but they're functioning at a surface level because they don't have the cognitive or psychological space to actually be present and enjoy. So some people might say, oh, I don't need to be alone. I love being around people all the time. And that's not entirely true, because then they're not fully experiencing their social interactions. They are managing, but that's not the same as truly processing or experiencing them. And that requires quiet time or alone time. And also it's a time of reflection, because our relationship with ourself is, if not equally more important than the relationship we have with other people. And we build that relationship with ourselves through processing our relationship with the world, which includes processing our relationship with people. So if we don't have isolation or quiet time, then we don't build a solid sense of self. And without that solid sense of self, we don't enter into social interactions in a way that feel rewarding.
I decided to follow Tamaro's advice and find solitude in the only place where I could completely remove myself, a place where I could withdraw my senses, a place where I could truly be alone. Then it happened. Everything became clear. Solitude is more than creativity, more than a psychiatric principle, and it's more than isolation. Solitude is a personal journey. Everyone finds something within themselves when they go there. My friend's solitude was to find himself, I think, to heal. It can be agonizing but liberating, and we all need it to an extent. So in the end, you have to ask yourself, what does solitude mean to you?